The following tale is plucked from the pages of a nameless tome, a manuscript whispered of in hushed tones by those who dare tread too close to the edge of sanity. It is said that merely speaking of the events you are about to hear invites danger beyond reckoning. For these are the deeds and misdeeds of souls whose fates were sealed the moment they crossed into shadowed realms where darkness reigns eternal. Be warned, listener, do not repeat what you hear to others. Do not commit these words to memory, nor linger on the images conjured within your mind. To do so is to risk incurring the wrath of, well, perhaps it is best if I leave the name unspoken. Even now, it claws at the corners of my mind. Know this, should you choose to continue, you do so at your own peril. And remember, you have been warned. This is a tale called, Ambushed in the Cosmic Dark. The depths of space stretched out like a yawning abyss, the vast emptiness dotted with the flickering remnants of shattered ships and debris, the aftermath of a devastating conflict. Amidst the floating wreckage drifted a massive battleship, its once formidable hull now scarred and scorched by relentless enemy fire. This was the Orion, a flagship of humanity's fleet, now a mere ghost of its former self. Inside, the ship was eerily silent, save for the soft hum of the emergency power systems struggling to keep the vessel from total collapse. Broken corridors and shattered bulkheads bore testament to the brutal clash that had left it crippled and alone. Commander Ethan Voss, the last surviving officer aboard, stumbled through the dimly lit halls. Blood stained his tattered uniform, his breaths came in ragged gasps, and his eyes darted around with a haunted, wild look. He had lost everything, his crew, his comrades, and his ship. The alien scourge had descended upon them like a plague, their savage onslaught tearing through the fleet without mercy. But it wasn't the destruction of his ship or the loss of his crew that weighed most heavily on his mind. No, it was the knowledge that the Orion wasn't entirely deserted. They were still here. The vicious aliens with their orange skin, large eyes, and sharp claws, the creatures that had ripped through the crew like wolves among lambs. He'd seen them, hunched over fallen bodies, their claws slick with the blood of his friends. His grip tightened on the plasma rifle slung over his shoulder. He was alone now, the last defender of this derelict vessel, the final line of defense against the predators that prowled the corridors. He couldn't let them reach the reactor. If they did, they could weaponize its energy and use it to annihilate what remained of the human fleet. He had to stop them, or die trying. The flickering emergency lights cast long shadows along the corridor, each step Ethan took echoing through the hollow remains of the Orion. He paused, listening for any sign of movement, any telltale scrape of claws against metal. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his heart hammered in his chest. A faint clicking sound reached his ears, an unmistakable sign of the creatures. Ethan raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger as he peered around a corner. The corridor beyond was dark, filled with drifting particles and the occasional burst of sparks from severed power conduits. But then he saw it, an outline against the distant glow of a malfunctioning control panel. One of them. The alien was crouched over a torn bulkhead, its massive eyes reflecting the faint light. Its orange skin gleamed wetly, and its claws, each as long as a man's forearm, tapped rhythmically against the metal floor. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The creature's head snapped up, and its eyes locked onto him. For a heartbeat, neither moved, a silent standoff in the ruined remains of a once proud ship. Then, with a shrill, hissing screech, the alien leapt forward, claws extended. Ethan fired, the plasma bolt streaking through the air. The creature twisted, the shot grazing its side, but it didn't stop. It charged, faster than he'd anticipated. With a curse, Ethan ducked back behind the corner, his heart racing. The creature crashed into the wall where he'd stood a second before, its claws gouging deep furrows in the metal. He swung his rifle around, firing again. This time, the plasma bolt struck true, hitting the alien square in the chest. It shrieked, the sound reverberating through the corridor, before it crumpled to the ground, twitching violently as its body smoldered. Panting, Ethan edged forward, prodding the creature's still form with the barrel of his rifle. It didn't move. Dead. But the echoes of its scream still lingered, carrying through the corridors of the ship like a beacon. They knew where he was now. Ethan moved swiftly through the shattered remains of the Orion, his mind racing. He had to get to the reactor, to find some way to shut it down or destroy it. Anything to keep these monsters from using it against humanity. He reached a blast door, the panel beside it sparking erratically. He glanced back down the corridor, no sign of pursuit yet. With a deep breath, he keyed in the emergency override, praying the system was still functional. The door ground open slowly, the mechanisms protesting every inch of the way. Ethan slipped through the gap, his rifle at the ready. He froze. The reactor chamber stretched out before him, a cavernous space filled with the thrum of energy coursing through the ship's core. And scattered throughout the room, moving among the catwalks and platforms, were dozens of the aliens. His blood ran cold. There were too many. Far too many. But he couldn't turn back. Not now. He'd come too far. Crouching low, Ethan crept along the edge of the chamber, keeping to the shadows. He needed to get to the main console, to initiate a manual shutdown. It was a suicide mission, but he had no other choice. One of the creatures, larger and more imposing than the rest, prowled near the central console. Its skin was a deeper shade of orange, and its eyes glowed with a sinister intelligence. The leader, Ethan realized with a sinking feeling. He took a steadying breath, raising his rifle. One shot. He'd only get one shot at this. Just as he pulled the trigger, something shifted in the shadows to his left. A clawed hand clamped down on his shoulder, jerking him back. His shot went wide, the plasma bolt striking the reactor housing instead of the leader. A deafening roar filled the chamber as the creatures reacted, their eyes locking onto him as one. Damn it! Ethan growled, wrestling against the creature that had grabbed him. He swung his rifle around, firing blindly. The creature shrieked and fell away, its chest smoking from the impact. But it was too late. The others were coming. Ethan turned and ran, his boots pounding against the metal catwalk. He had to reach the override switch, had to shut it all down. A heavy weight slammed into him from behind, knocking him flat. Claws raked across his back, tearing through his uniform. Pain flared through him, but he twisted, firing his rifle point-blank into the creature's face. It screamed and recoiled, giving him the opening he needed. Ethan staggered to his feet, blood dripping down his back. He stumbled forward, his vision blurring as the pain threatened to overwhelm him. The console was just ahead. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the switch. A massive clawed hand grabbed his arm, wrenching him back. He was spun around, face to face with the leader. It hissed, its eyes burning with hatred. No, Ethan gasped, struggling against the creature's iron grip. I won't let you. The leader's claws tightened around his throat, and Ethan's vision darkened. He felt his strength ebbing away, his body growing limp. But then, from somewhere deep within, a final surge of defiance flared. With the last of his strength, Ethan drove the barrel of his rifle into the creature's chest and fired. The leader howled, its grip slackening. Ethan collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. He glanced up, his eyes locking onto the console. Summoning every ounce of willpower, he dragged himself forward, his hand closing around the switch. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the shutdown. The reactor's hum died away, the lights in the chamber flickering and dimming. The creatures screeched in fury, their eyes blazing in the sudden darkness. Ethan lay still, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He'd done it. He'd stopped them. But as the leader loomed over him, its claws poised to strike, he knew it had come at a terrible cost. The Orion drifted in silence, its once bright lights now reduced to a dim glow. Inside, The creatures prowled through the darkness, their shrieks of rage and hunger echoing through the empty corridors. In the reactor chamber, the leader stood over Ethan's lifeless body, its eyes glinting with a cold, merciless light. The shutdown had been successful, but it didn't matter now. They had what they wanted, the ship, its technology, and a new base from which to strike. Ethan had bought humanity some time, but only just. The creatures would learn. They would adapt. And then, they would strike again. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this tale. I hope you enjoyed the story and felt immersed in this world of fantasy and adventure. If you'd like to hear more epic stories like this, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next chapter in our journey. See you in the next adventure.